Wild Witches by Ruth M. Do you know the story of Kara and the Wild Witches? If you're sitting comfortably, then I'll begin.
Go, croaked the wily witch. Go to the bottom of the lake, the silver lake beyond the icy mountains, and bring back Rilke's ring, which you will find there, she ordered. If you can find it, she added, laughing her ugly laugh.
She was standing outside her dark den at dusk. She turned to the other wild witches by the cackling hearth, and they bent their hairy heads low together. And the wily witch cackled hoarsely, saying,
Once it is in my hands, I will break it into 1,000 pieces until all that remains of the truth is a small black smudge.
And they laughed together and watched and waited to see if the girl would go. And she did. She had to. Kara was only small, but she was brave. So off she set. She travelled 7 days and 7 nights northwards over the icy mountains, discovering why they were known as the icy mountains, as all her toes froze day by day and all her bones froze night after night. On the 8th day, she reached the Silver Lake, and she tied a huge boulder from the shores of the lake to her waist and plunged into the dark, still waters. She felt herself being pulled down and down and down, deeper and deeper, until she reached the bottom, which was a carpet of coloured jewels, the like of which she'd never seen before in her life. And there, half hidden amongst the jewels, Kara thought she saw it, the missing ring of jet, the ring of truth. So she picked it up, and she saw it was inscribed on the inside, Rilke's ring. Silently, quickly, she put it in the grey canvas pouch around her waist and turned her arms upwards straight away so she could reach the surface of the lake again before the gruesome guardians of the lake should realise the theft and begin their pursuit of the thief. And back Kara went, over the mountains, 7 days and 7 nights, icy toes and icy bones, until she came to the witch's den. Unbeknown to them all, the guardians left the lake and followed her invisibly. And when they reached the witch's coven, they hid themselves deep in the depths of the den, blending with the dark mosses, awaiting their next move. And Kara handed the ring hesitantly to the wild witches.
Yes, that's the one,
the wily witch croaked, examining the small ring and setting it down by the spitting embers in the hearth.
But this is not enough. This was only the first of the tasks. And now it is my turn, the whining witch whined. My wily sister cannot destroy the ring just yet. You must go to the top of the sunlit mountains, and there you'll find the calamitous cave, and inside the cave you'll find Chakil's chalice of alabaster, guarded closely by the dreadful dragon who breathes fire and poisonous vapors. This too we need to fulfill our destiny.
She laughed her wicked laugh. She turned to the other wild witches, and they bent their hairy heads low together, and the whining witch whined, Once it is in my hands, I will empty it drop
by drop of all the hope that dwells therein.
And they laughed together their awful laugh and watched and waited to see if she would go. And she did. She had to. Cara was only small, but she was bold. So off she set. She began her journey all over again, this time turning the other way to go south to the sunlit mountains. Blinded by the sun for 7 days and burnt by the strong hot wind for 7 nights, she climbed and climbed, up and up, until finally on the 8th day she reached the top and found the calamitous cave. But there she had to wait and work out a way to distract the dreadful dragon, who never seemed to sleep, ever. Before she had found the solution, out of the blue, a big black boulder came crashing down, bouncing right on top of the dreadful dragon's head, rendering him unconscious in an instant. So she ran inside the calamitous cave, which was full of a dire dragon smell, so strong she could barely breathe at all. What was it I was meant to be looking for this time? She asked herself, so weary from the journey she'd almost forgotten the purpose of her quest. Oh, it was Jekyll's chalice of alabaster, whatever that might be, she remembered, and began to look around for her, for something that might resemble a chalice. Right at the very back of the cave, by a pile of old trees the dragon kept to stoke his fires, she saw a translucent cup-shaped object, to the right of which was a Gothic printed sign, "Jekyll's chalice, do not touch." There it is, she said to herself in a burst of unbelieving happiness. She picked up the chalice of hope and put it safely in her grey woven pouch and tied it around her waist and ran out of the cave. Just as she was hurrying past the dreadful dragon, she saw that one of his eyes flickered open. So Cara darted to one side and made her way down the mountainside, zigzagging all the way for 7 days and 7 nights, struggling in the heat until she came once more to the witch's den. Unbeknown to them all, the dreadful dragon left his lair and followed her invisibly until he reached the witch's warren and hid himself among the thick tree roots and waited for the time to come to make his next move. "Here it is," she exclaimed.
"Oh, you have done well, little girl," said the whining witch, grasping the chalice greedily and setting it down by the flickering embers in the hearth. "But you cannot believe that this is the end of it."
"For now it is my turn," interrupted the willful witch. "These two cannot destroy the ring or the chalice just yet. There is still one more task to do, one more thing we need. Now, you must go to the land where the legends live, beyond the slimy swamps, and bring me the pearly mirror of Murloc." And she laughed her sinister laugh. She turned to the other wild witches, and they bent their hairy heads together, and the willful witch whispered hoarsely, "Once it is in my hands, I will smash it into smithereens until wisdom is just a pearly memory." Ha! 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 And they all laughed again, their peevish laugh, and watched and waited to see if she would go. And she did. She had to. Cara was only small, but her courage knew no bounds. So off she set. She began her journey all over again, this time turning towards the slimy swamps in the east. It was worse than she'd imagined. The slimy swamps were knee-deep, full of everything slithery you could think of. Frogs, toads, wriggly things with lots of legs, squirming things, and many you could never imagine even in your worst nightmares. Creatures with no name, creatures who had no end and no beginning, wriggling in an eternal coil and always just where she had to step, wet and oily. For 7 days and 7 nights, she waded through the murky marshes and the dank, heavy damp, through the thick grey and the gloom, knowing no difference between day or night, wading onwards, desperate to complete her final quest. And at last, on the 8th day, Kara found herself stepping onto warm, dry, golden sand. And she knew she'd arrived at last in the land where legends live. There, on the golden shore, she found a beautiful shell which she decided to take for her own collection. But when she held it up, she saw that on the inside was the shiniest pearly mirror she'd ever seen. And at its base, near the point of the shell, which formed a handle, were printed in pure gold the words, "Murloc's Mirror." She took the mirror of wisdom carefully and hid it safely deep in the grey traveller's pouch, tied tightly around her waist, before entering the swamps again, struggling for 7 days and 7 nights against the writhing, slippering, twisting creatures. Finally, wet and damp, with some of the slimy things still clinging to her all over, Kara arrived back at the witch's den. Unbeknown to them all, the slimy things left the swamp and followed her invisibly until they came to the witch's lair, where they hid themselves, clinging to the creeped walls, waiting for the time to come to make their next move. "Here it is," Kara said bravely.
You have done well, little girl," snarled the willful witch,
snatching the mirror and setting it down by the glimmering embers in the hearth. Then they all joined in, chanting together.
"But there is still one more task to do. We can destroy none of these 3 things yet. You must bring us the golden casket of Cascaran."
But that's not fair," she protested. You said the last task was the final one." Their laughing was louder than ever before.
"Just one more," they wheedled.
The wild witches bent their hairy heads low together and cackled hoarsely.
"Once that is in our hands, we will empty it of all it contains and break it into 1,000 pieces until all that is left of love lies in fragments."
They laughed loud together, their nasty laugh, and watched and waited to see if she would go. And she did. She had to. Kara was only small, and she was frightened. But off she set. She began her journey all over again, this time turning towards the west, knowing her journey would take her over the windy waters of the Western Ocean, knowing that no one had ever gone that way and returned, knowing she had to try. 7 times 7 days and 7 times 7 nights. This was no journey like the others. The wind-driven waves pulled her here and pushed her there, and she had no power against them. No islands for rest, no footholds. She had to let herself be taken by the turbulent dark waters. And then after 7 times 7 days and 7 times 7 nights, the wind ceased and the waters ended, and Kara was left in a garden full of flowers. And amongst the roses in the centre of the garden was a small clearing with a sign, "The Golden Casket of Kaskaran." And there lay the casket itself. She put the casket of love carefully in her old grey pouch and tied it to her waist and went back towards the windy waters. Again they tossed and turned her about, helpless, but unlike her other journeys, the return was quicker than the way there, for the winds were whirling the right way, wilder than ever, and Kara was rushed back in the blink of an eye, wet and tired all over, washed ashore close by the witch's den. Unbeknown to them all, the windy waves pursued her softly and followed her invisibly until they were just outside the witch's place, where they hid in the mist and prepared to make their final move. Kara handed them the golden casket of Kaskaran triumphantly. They fought amongst themselves to snatch the casket, and in the confusion it fell with an ominous sound amidst the dent embers of the hearth. At that moment, the guardians, the dragon, the swamp creatures, and the waves all rushed upon the wild witches, making a commotion the like of which had never been heard before in the whole history of the world. With a horrible howl, the wild witches all leapt up into the air together and vanished, leaving behind them only a thick trail of viscous, putrid smoke in the sky and the echoes of their last shrill shrieks. In the den, by the hearth, amidst the old scattered bones, the ashes and the sodden leaves, lay the 4 first artifacts: the ring of jet, the chalice of alabaster, the pearly mirror, and the golden casket. And in a flash, by Kara's side, stood the figures of Rilke, Chakil, Murloc, and Kaskaran, all smiling solemnly. "At last the spell is broken, and we are saved," they said in one voice. "And not only saved, but reunited, thanks to you and your bravery. How can we thank you?" But she was there no longer. Kara was gone. "The time for searching is now over," said Rilke. "Let her go," said Chakil. "Let her be," said Murloc. "Her task is complete," said Kaskaran. The end.